broads in Atlanta. Twisted the lean, the family. Credit cards and the scammers. Hitting the licks in the van. Legacies, family. Wait and see, look like a panda. Going out like a Montana. Honey killers on the hands. Legacies.
What's up, slackers? Welcome to Book Cheats. As you may notice, I had to get a haircut for school. I go to a school where you're not allowed to have long hair, and you're not allowed to have facial hair without doctor's permission. I basically had to get a doctor's note just to have this. My suggestion for those of you who are looking for colleges is if you like to be individual and you like to think differently than other people, go to a school without crazy restrictions. I made the mistake and just chose a school that was really cheap. If it's like $1,000 more a semester or something, it's totally worth it, just so you can be yourself. Part of the reason why I'm sad about the haircut is I had the goal to have Jared Leto's haircut. I'll put the picture right here. Anyway, I'll stop crying about my hair. So for this week's tie, the request was made for a pink tie. This pretty much was the pinkest tie that I had. You're welcome. So today we're going to be talking about The Great Gatsby Chapter 7. This chapter is the longest chapter that I've read since starting Book Cheats. And I was trying to summarize it, and I typed up over 3,000 words to summarize it. So for this video, I'm going to do more of a general summary just because there's a lot of stuff to cover. So if you want the more detailed summary, I actually launched my website yesterday. It's called mybookcheats.com. I'll post a screenshot over here. Basically what I'm going to do for the website, I'm going to post the typed summaries as soon as I get them done, which is usually a few days before I do the videos. So for those of you who are really needing a summary, it's going to be on my website. I'm still working on my website, so it's going to look a lot better and there's going to be more details to it, but I feel like it's pretty usable right now. You should check it out. I also started my very first Twitter account, and you can tweet me or follow me at book_cheats. So I'm gonna try to post there every day. I think it's important to be on other social media platforms. If you guys want to follow me there, that would be awesome. Anyway, let's get into this very, very long chapter. So at the beginning of this chapter, Nick hasn't seen Gatsby in some time. So Nick goes over to Gatsby's house to check on him to see what's up. When Nick goes over to Gatsby's house, a new butler answers the door. Gatsby had fired over half of his staff. The new butler is rude to Nick, and Nick tells the butler to tell Gatsby that he came over. The next day, Gatsby calls Nick. Nick asks Gatsby if he fired his staff. He says that he did, and that he fired them because Daisy had been coming over very often in the afternoons, and that part of his staff was judging him for it because she was still married. His new staff was friends of Mr. Wolfsham, and they were all brothers and sisters. Gatsby tells Nick that he was calling because Daisy wanted to invite Nick over for lunch. So Nick hops on a train, and while he was on the train, a woman drops her wallet and he picks it up and gives it back to her. Everybody on the train kind of looked at Nick as if he was trying to steal it and failed. And Nick felt weird because he was just trying to be a good person. Nick gets to Daisy's house and Gatsby's already there too. When Nick first gets to Daisy's house, Tom is in the other room talking to Mr. Wilson, his lover's husband, about selling his yellow car to him on the phone. They're sort of arguing and he hangs up the phone. Tom comes into the room and Daisy asks Tom to get them drinks. When Tom leaves the room, Daisy pulls Gatsby in and kisses him on the lips. After some conversation, we finally meet Daisy's daughter for the first time. She comes into the room all dressed up and her name is Pammy. Pammy comes up to Daisy, her mom, really excited and tells her mom that she got ready today early. Daisy says that she knows and it's because she wanted to show her off. Gatsby comments that Pammy looks nothing like Tom and looks a lot like Gatsby. He points out the shape of her face, even the texture and color of her hair. Tom comes into the room with the drinks and he could cut the tension with a knife. Tom invites Gatsby to go outside to see his property and Nick follows. Gatsby pointed out to Tom that his house was right across the bay. The conversation got sort of awkward and then they went back into the house. When they get back into the house, Daisy is complaining that it's so hot outside that it's making her so confused. Basically, she's sort of reflecting on the fact that she doesn't know what to do because she's still married to Tom, but she loves Gatsby. Daisy says that they should all go into town. Daisy looks over at Gatsby and she's sort of hot and dazed, and she comments that Gatsby looks really cool. She's sort of mesmerized and she says that Gatsby always looks so cool and that he looks like the guy from the commercials depicting the perfect man. Gatsby and Daisy were locked eyes. You could totally tell that they just loved each other. Tom noticed this and he was completely shocked. He finally realized that Daisy and Gatsby were in love with each other. Tom sort of tries to break things up up and tells them that they need to go into town. Daisy complains and says, "Quit trying to rush us and let's smoke a cigarette first." But Tom wouldn't budge, so they go outside to get into the cars. They go outside and Tom tells Gatsby that he'll take Gatsby's car with his wife and that Gatsby should drive Jordan and Nick. Daisy protests and says that Gatsby and her are gonna drive together. And so Gatsby and Daisy jump into Tom's yellow car and Tom is stuck taking Nick and Jordan. As they're driving, Tom asks Nick and Jordan if he noticed anything strange between Gatsby and Daisy. When there's sort of an awkward silence, Tom realizes that they knew the whole time. He says to them, "You must think I'm pretty dumb, don't you?" Tom says that he isn't dumb and that he's actually been investigating Gatsby. Tom says that he hired an investigator and he found out that Gatsby never went to Oxford, but that he's from Oxford, New Mexico. Tom also says that he knows that Gatsby and Daisy knew each other before he and Daisy were married. As they get into town, Jordan realizes that Gatsby's car is running low on gas. So Jordan tells Tom to pull into the gas station. They were just driving by Mr. Wilson's shop where Tom's lover lives, Myrtle, and he pulls over to fill up with gas. Mr. Wilson comes out and he says that he's incredibly sick. Tom tells him to fill him up and Mr. Wilson struggles to fill up the car. Mr. Wilson bugs Tom again about buying his yellow car, the one that Gatsby's driving, and Tom asks him what does he want to buy the car for so much anyway. Mr. Wilson says that he wants to get some money so that he and his wife can leave New York and move west. Mr. Wilson says that he found out that Myrtle was living a secret life and that he's been so worried about it that it's made him sick. He also says that if they don't leave, he feels like he's gonna lose Myrtle. Tom is sort of humbled by this situation because he just found out Daisy was cheating on him while Mr. Wilson found out that Myrtle was cheating on him. Mr. Wilson doesn't know that Tom is Myrtle's lover, but because Tom felt sorry for Mr. Wilson, he tells Mr. Wilson that he'll sell him his car and that he'll have somebody bring it by this afternoon. As they're leaving, Myrtle was staring out the window and she was looking at Jordan jealously because she thought Jordan was Tom's wife. As they drove away, a feeling of panic swept over Tom because his whole life was crumbling before him. He was losing his lover and he was losing his wife. So he sped up and drove incredibly sporadically because he wanted to catch up to Gatsby and Daisy. They finally caught up to Daisy and Gatsby, and when they got out of the car, Daisy said that she wanted to go to the movies. Tom said that he didn't want to and that they should go to Central Park, and he didn't want to fight about it. So the gang heads over to Central Park, and when they get to Central Park, they rent a hotel room in the Plaza Hotel. When they first get into the room, everybody's having a great time joking around when Tom sort of scolds Daisy for saying something. Gatsby interrupts him and defends Daisy. After that, there was an awkward silence and the tension came back into the room. After a minute, Tom sort of personally attacked Gatsby and he asked why Gatsby always called everybody old sport. Daisy interrupted and scolded Tom for being so rude and said that she was gonna leave if he was gonna be rude. The conversation sort of toned down and they started talking about this guy named Bill Blocks Biloxi. Bill Blocks Biloxi. Bill Blocks Biloxi. Say that 4 times. Bill Blocks Biloxi. Bill Blocks Biloxi. Bill Blocks Biloxi. Everybody talks about how they met Bill, and it's kind of weird how everybody knows him. Bill was this guy who was sort of a wedding crasher who slowly emerged his way into everybody's life. As everybody's talking about how they knew Bill, Tom breaks in because Gatsby hadn't said if he knew Bill. Tom says that Gatsby must have known Bill because they supposedly went to Oxford at the same time. Gatsby defends not knowing Bill by saying that he really wasn't an Oxford guy because he only went there for 5 months. Everybody was now sort of doubting Gatsby because if they had both gone to Oxford at the same time, he should have known Bill. Nick sort of restores his reputation by saying that after the war, they let officers go to any European school as sort of a trial thing. Nick says that his trust in Gatsby came back after he explained this. Tom was sort of frustrated that his little passive-aggressive attack didn't work, and this time he was more direct. He personally attacked Gatsby and he asked him what kind of row he was trying to start in his house. Daisy defended Gatsby and said that he wasn't trying to start any sort of row and told Tom to have some self-control. Tom complained and said, "Self-control? What am I supposed to do, let some guy sleep with my wife?" He says he knows he doesn't throw big parties like Gatsby, but he doesn't want his house to be like a pigsty. He says the world is descending and soon blacks and whites will be having a relationship. Obviously, Tom is racist. Jordan consoles him them and says, hey, we're all white here. Gatsby breaks in to sort of verbally fight back, but Daisy interrupts him because she doesn't want him to hurt Tom's feelings. Tom tells Daisy that he wants to hear what Gatsby has to say. Gatsby tells Tom that Daisy never loved him, and the only reason why Daisy married him was because Gatsby was poor, and she was tired of waiting for Gatsby. Everybody tries to leave the room at this point because the fight has begun, but Gatsby and Tom won't let them leave. Tom demands to know what's been going on. Gatsby says that's it. He says that he and Daisy had loved each other for 5 years. Even when Tom and Daisy got married, Daisy still loved Gatsby. Tom rebuttals and says that that's a lie and that Daisy loves him and that he loves Daisy too. Tom says that sure, he's run around and cheated on her a few times, but he always comes back to Daisy. Daisy breaks in from the shock of that statement and reminds him that in Chicago, he cheated on her so much that they had to leave the entire state. Gatsby goes over and stands by Daisy, and Gatsby sort of says, you know what you have to do, tell him. So Daisy sort of awkwardly and uncomfortably says that she never loved Tom. Tom keeps reminding her about intimate memories and asks her if she loved him then. She says no every time he brings up a memory, until she finally breaks down and says Gatsby asks for too much. She says that she used to love Tom, but that she loves Gatsby now, and that's all that matters. After this happens, Gatsby is in awe. Tom apologizes for being a terrible husband and says that he's going to improve. Gatsby broke in and says it's too late, you've already lost her. Daisy can't take it anymore, and she tells Gatsby that they need to leave. As they're leaving the room, Tom breaks in and says that he's been investigating Gatsby. He says that he found out where Gatsby has his wealth. He says that Gatsby owns a few drugstores in Chicago where he sells fake beer. Just a reminder, this is during Prohibition. Gatsby defends himself and says what's the big deal of owning a few drugstores. Tom continues to reveal things about Gatsby by saying that he met a guy named Walter Chase. He says that Walter Chase was a guy who used to work for Gatsby, and Gatsby just let him go to jail. Gatsby defends himself and says that Walter Chase was a guy who needed money and that he had nothing to do with him going to jail. Tom says that Walter Chase was willing to tell a lot about Gatsby and says that Gatsby had been breaking betting laws too, or gambling laws. Tom continues and says that Walter was even too scared to tell something about Gatsby because Mr. Wolfshen had threatened his life. When everybody looked towards Gatsby, Gatsby had sort of a deer in the headlights look. Everybody looked between the two, but it was pretty obvious that Tom had won this fight. Everybody's confidence in Gatsby had kind of faded away. Daisy told Tom to stop, and Tom said that her little flirtation was over. Gatsby and Daisy leave, and Tom, in sort of his victory, asked Jordan and Nick if they wanted something to drink. Neither one of them answered, just from the shock of the whole thing. And when Tom started to get pissed off because nobody was answering him. When Tom addressed them again, Nick says that he realized that today was his birthday and he just turned 30. The three of them started to drive home, and Nick was sort of having that midlife crisis of being 30, and he felt like he was just going to be alone the rest of his life. He felt this way until Jordan leaned on his shoulder and held his hand and sort of cuddled with him as they were driving. Tom was sort of talking to himself, acting like people were listening and joking to himself, but he didn't sound very confident. He was obviously stressed about the whole situation. The chapter sort of changes its setting, and we're brought to this young Greek guy named Michaelius, something like that. I'm just gonna call him Michaelis. Michaelis is over visiting George Wilson when George tells him that he and Myrtle are leaving town. Michaelis was sort of shocked because he didn't think that George was able to make such a big decision. They talk for a little bit and Michaelis has to leave. He says that he'll be back in a little bit though. Michaelis leaves and he takes longer than he expected to get back, but as he gets back he hears Myrtle and George arguing. Myrtle tells George to beat her up and to throw her down the stairs because he's such a coward. There's sort of a struggle and she runs out of the house. As Myrtle runs out of the house, a car hits her and she dies. The news headline the next day was called Death Car. Michaelis was the main witness to her death. By the time Tom, Nick, and Jordan drove down the road, there was a bunch of cars surrounding the body. Tom was sort of excited that something had happened. As they got closer, he said excitedly that something big happened and that he wants to take a look. They get out of the car and they see Myrtle's body on the ground. Tom goes over to George, who is struggling to talk to an officer about what happened. He sternly asks George what happened. George says that a car hit her passing another car and and that the son of a bitch didn't even stop. A black guy breaks in and says that he saw the car, that it was a yellow new car. Tom goes over to George and grips him by the shoulders. Tom says that he just got here and that George knows that it wasn't him. Tom realizes that the car that hit Myrtle from the description was the car he was going to sell George, and it was the same car that Gatsby and Daisy had left in. The officer came up to Tom to figure out what this was about, why he was grabbing George, and he interrogated Tom about the color of his car. When Jordan and Nick vouched for him, the officer let them be. Tom shoved George back into the house and had him sit down and told two guys to watch him. They snuck out of there, and as they drove home, Tom was sobbing quietly, mumbling to himself about the bastard not even stopping. They go back to Tom's house and they see that Daisy is there. Tom regains his composure and apologizes to Nick for not dropping him off. He tells Nick that he'll call him a taxi. He invites Nick to come inside, but Nick says that he wants to wait outside. Jordan asks Nick why he wants to wait, and Nick says that he's tired of all the drama today. When the butler called the taxi, Nick decides to go to the gate to wait by himself. As he walks to the gate, he sees Gatsby hiding in the brush. Nick asks Gatsby what he's doing there. Gatsby asks Nick if he saw anything on the way home. Nick says that he did, and Gatsby asks if she was dead. Nick says that she was, and Gatsby says that that's what he told Daisy, that he thought she was dead. Gatsby asks who the woman was, and Nick says that it was the wife of the garage owner. Nick asks Gatsby how it happens, and Gatsby says that he was driving and that he tried to swerve out of the way. Nick interrupts him and guesses that Daisy was the driver. Gatsby admits that that was the truth, but he says that he's going to vouch for Daisy and take the blame. Gatsby says that Daisy asked to drive to calm her nerves, and that as she was driving, the woman came out of nowhere, and Daisy tried to swerve out of the way into the other car, but that she was too scared and hit the woman head on. Daisy was freaked out and stepped on the gas. Gatsby tried to get her to stop, but she wouldn't stop. Eventually, Gatsby pulled on the emergency brake, and the car screeched to a halt. Daisy fell over on Gatsby's lap, and Gatsby drove the rest of the way home. Gatsby says that he's going to stay the night in the brush to watch the house, because if Tom finds out that Daisy was the driver, things could get violent. Nick says that he'll take a look real quick before the taxi gets there, and he looks into Daisy's room. Daisy was nowhere to be found. He walks around the house and sees Daisy in the kitchen talking to Tom at the table. Tom was talking to her really aggressively and sternly, and Daisy was nodding her head, and they were holding hands. It looked like they were sort of patching things up. Nick heads back, and Gatsby asks what he saw. Nick says that everything was quiet, and the taxi arrives. Nick invites Gatsby to come onto the taxi, and Gatsby says that he's gonna stay there and watch the house. Nick felt bad for Gatsby because he knew that Gatsby was fighting a losing battle. And that concludes the chapter. Thank you so much for watching Book Cheats and sticking it out through this long chapter. Please leave a like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and check out my new website. If you have any questions from your homework, leave a comment down below. You guys have a great day and slack on.
I get broads in Atlanta, chasing dope lean and shit, sipping fountain. Credit cards and the scammers, wake up beside your shit, let designer, whole bunch of lattice shit, they be acting